back to another absolutely banging video. Today we're going to be going through my bike ride at Ironman Switzerland. So we'll start off with some descriptive analytics. We'll go through a little bit of a power distribution. We'll go through the course, and I'll talk a little bit about the dynamics that took place on the day. And then at the end, I'll kind of go through what I would have done differently. All right, so first things first, I did ride slightly slower than 4:29. Unfortunately, I was like a 4:30:01 or something ridiculous. Just can't believe I let that happen. Bike course was technically a mile short, but who's really counting? I think if you have over 5,280 feet of gain, which would be a mile, it should count anyway. So, yeah, we had around 6,500 feet of gain, and we can see normalized power of just over 270, average 253. Pretty high cadence, speed. We'll get into that in a sec, how it differed between everything. So, yeah, I'll first start off with saying I had a really good swim at this race. I came out in the main group, and that really set my day up well because I was 10th out of the water, and then I was on the bike with literally the front group. So I had the guys that I needed to be with, and yeah. So we'll kind of just go through the course really fast. You can see there's 6,500 feet of climbing, but it's actually very punchy. If you look at this elevation profile, punchy for a triathlon. There's a lot of rolling hills, and then there's quite a bit of downhill, like false flat downhill stuff. And so as someone who's 68 kilos in a group with a bunch of guys who are between 70 to 75 kilos, these are some of the areas that I found very challenging, were those downhills where you really are having to just push high watts to get through it. So that was probably a little bit about the course, right? So we're looking at like 3,200 feet of climbing each lap. And second lap, we're navigating age groupers as well. So a little bit more traffic on there. But yeah, you can kind of see a bit of a rolling section in the first half out towards Bern, and then a pretty long sustained climb that really kicks up. And then basically it's pretty easy once you get, the last 15 miles of the bike course were pretty damn fast. So once you kind of get through 40, you can kind of cruise it in. And yeah, so that's a little bit about the bike course. So again, we've got all of that. Now let's get into some analysis, because it was a pretty good race, but it was also a blow up. So we're going to look at, first things first, we're going to look at lap 2, lap 3, or lap 1, lap 2, sorry. So first lap, I rode really fast, 2:09:48. Second lap, 2:19. So what happened, right? Well, I ended up getting dropped because Marius, who ended up having the fastest bike split, ended up catching us around here, and yeah, blew my doors off immediately, and I just exploded. So we'll get into that in a minute, but yeah, let's look at lap 1. So right out the gate, I'll look at the average power for this first 2 hours, 270 basically, normalized power 286. But if we really want to look at that first real section, we're looking at average power 280, normalized 291 for the first hour of this bike. Now, I also want to point out that the average temperature was pretty low, so it's really easy to get those watts out. But yeah, was I over biking? Probably a fair bit. And the thing was, I really didn't realize that I should have acted like I had been there before. I went to the front at the beginning, and I was just drilling it as hard as I could. I had Fred Funk behind me for a while, and I was like, damn, hell yeah, this Ironman shit. I remember being about 30 minutes in on one of these downhills being like, damn, this Ironman shit, low-key kind of easy. And obviously, as the second lap will tell you, it wasn't. So yeah, first lap, I'm in the main group, right? And this is kind of what it takes to hang in one of those groups. So I'm not a huge guy, but this is a pretty hard course. 4.2 watts per kilo, 290 normalized. I could have done this on probably 10 watts less if I had just sat in the group, to be perfectly honest. I was being pretty aggressive, and you can see even then, 277, we can go into some of their power data in a minute, but I was pushing less than all of them, and I still felt like I was riding over my limit a good amount of the time while I was on the front, really pushing the pace a good amount, just riding my little heart out. And yeah, I rode really well, I thought, the first part. 269 average is great, 286 normalized, and that's what it took to stay with the front. And honestly, if I had kept that pace up, or even been able to hang on for a little bit of the second lap, it could have set me up for an even better result. I ended up finishing 9th on the day. So now let's go into lap 2. So what happened, right? You can see the average power drops about 40 watts. So we went from 269 average on the first lap to 238 average, 254 normalized. So like you can see pretty much I just completely fell off across the board. That's a great speed to power ratio, 238 to 23.8. So maybe my power meter reads low, but yeah, I mean I was really riding the struggle bus. I really, my quads were bricked up. Like I was doing my best to not lose too much time, but yeah, I would say that basically what happened. So yeah, I think it's like a good illustration of how a pro half Ironman's raced, right? Like I still came off the bike in 8th place despite riding literally 10 minutes slower in the second lap, but that's because I spent the whole first lap putting myself into a good position. So let's go through some of the the 25 watt distribution. So we can see here, basically time soft pedaling, 35 minutes the whole bike. Now that's pretty low, and like there was a good amount of downhill on there, um, and I think that's pretty low. And then let's look at, this is me 68 whatever kilos, time above 300 watts in a full distance Ironman. So this is the difference between maybe a professional race and an amateur race. A lot of people don't understand like how the drafting effect works, but you really have to spend a good amount of time going over your pace if you want to stay in that range where you're in the group, and then you're going to spend a decent amount under it as well. So like, you might be sitting at 225 for a minute, and then like 10 seconds, and then you're going to go 325 for another 10 seconds. It just doesn't make any sense. It's literally pedal stroke to pedal stroke. So you can see I spent an hour 20 to over 300 watts during a full distance race, which is like, if you told me that when you're an amateur, I'd be like, oh yeah, you're gonna run terrible. I didn't run great. I ran like 252, but it was a very much a damage control run the whole time. And then yeah, we're looking at over 2 hours above 275 watts, and then we're looking at basically 3 hours above 250. So like, while you might shoot to average 250 watts in an Ironman, if you're riding alone, you might ride between 250 and 275 watts a lot of the time. Maybe you're spending, but you're not going to be spending an hour 20 above 300. But where you really make up that speed differential is by being able to stay in the group and do those big surges. So that's kind of the distribution of power that we're looking at. We're looking at like a pretty decent bell curve here. Majority of that time, basically majority of the time is actually spent above 250, and just under half of the ride was spent above 275 watts. So yeah, I think that gives people a good illustration of it. So let's look at a zone distribution as well. So you can see here's a power zone distribution. I tried to keep it under 500 watts as best I could, but yeah, you're still spending, I still spent 6 minutes above 400 watts basically, which again, 2% of the race isn't much. And if you look at any professional bike race power file, you're going to see probably closer to 8% there. I'll confirm that in a second. And we'll look at like the VO2 max zone, right? So we're spending, 25 minutes there. And then, yeah, we've got that threshold zone, right? So we're looking at, again, that's like that hour 22 above threshold, and that, or threshold or above, and that can get real hard on the body. So just to give you guys a little bit of an illustration there. So I also want to look at, let's see who we have. I mean, I had Valentine in the group. Now Valentine was a solid athlete, and hopefully it's still recording this. Yeah, we're getting Valentine's file on here. So Valentine, he ended up riding 8 minutes faster than me, and he was with me in the group the whole time for the first part, and then he was able to stay with them for the second part. But you can see, he's still he's averaging more watts than I am. But yeah, let's look at his first part. You see 288 average, 306 normalized. You can see it's still pretty punchy, and towards that end of the bike on some of these sections, he was able to sit in the group a little bit better than I was, and I was really struggling off the back, and that's where he was able to be a bit more efficient. But we can still see his power drop off. See, he went to 212 for the second lap, so he went 286 watts on the second lap, and he was 288 norm on the first. So you can really see like he didn't fall off even close to as bad as I did on that second lap, and he was really riding smooth and steady, and he was rewarded with a nice 4th place. I also want to look at his zone distribution for him. So you can see we have a very similar time. He just happens to be significantly bigger and stronger than I am. But he spent, right there, we have time above 500 watts. He's spending a minute five, 6 minutes in the anaerobic, 22 minutes in the VO2, an hour 20 at threshold. So he's still spending a ton of time on this bike ride, riding pretty damn hard. And again, we've got a lot of time in that tempo range, so you can kind of recover when you're in the bottom end of this tempo range. So if he's riding 265, he can probably recover pretty well during that. And then let's look at a 25 watt distribution. So he spent way less time not pedaling than I did, because I was like 25 minutes in there. And then time above 300 watts, we can see he did about 226 above 300 watts. So just a good illustration of kind of what happened during the bike ride on there. And then I also want to look at Fred Funk's file, because he was in our group for the first half. So we got big boy Fred, Mr. Famous Influencer, and unfortunately Fred did not get a Kona slot. And we can see, so he rode 421, about a minute faster than Valentine. Not a great bike. Okay, buddy. Yeah, whatever you say. And let's go through. So we can see he averaged 304, normalized 320, which is pretty excellent. So there's his first lap, and here's where I had him on the ropes. I was leading a good amount of this section, and he's pushing 335. So our power meters clearly read very different, because I was definitely more towards the front. Like, me and him were sharing a good amount of the lead on this, and like, obviously I was biking way harder than he was, but you can see, like, he's doing 4.3 watts per kilo. I'm in a similar thing. So look at his lap 2, and you can see he falls off to 299, 312 normalized. So this is the surge when Marius came through and dropped everyone, where he had to do 363, and that obviously didn't work out for him or really anyone else in the group. Marius rode way faster than all of us. And so, 295, he's closing it in pretty fast. And if you're a big guy and you're pushing that speed at the end, like, I want to look at the closing stage, actually. So this is the one segment I want to highlight. So we're looking at this closing false flat down, right? We're at 1.4%. This is if I've got the watts, we're moving, right? So 269 watts, your arrow, whatever. So he's averaging 32.4 miles an hour, and I want to look at mine on that. So we're going to go through, my PR is 1133 on that, right? So we're going to have to go to we're going to look at mine. 1 second, once it load. Actually, we'll go here. Okay. We're going to look at that. So so Fred's 1133, and on my last time through, I lost a full minute there, because I was so fucking cooked. We're talking like 203 watts, and I'm still going 30 miles an hour, which is pretty wild, right? I'm only going like 2 miles an hour slower than him on like 60 less watts, which is pretty good. But so, like, maybe my power meter's not reading accurate, because there I am going like 27 miles an hour on 240 watts. But anyhow, like, you can really see these sections, like, if you've got the watts and it's falls flat downhill, like, it makes a huge difference. So that's just a little bit. Let's look at Fred's power distribution. So this is what it would have taken to get on to the podium. All right. Frederick Funk. And this will be our final thing, and then I'll go into what I would probably do different next time. So a little bit of Fred's power distribution. We'll go with the zone distribution. So you can see he was super steady. He hardly spent any time above VO2 max, any time above anaerobic, right? He had 37 minutes in threshold, and he was really able to control that effort, and he ran really well. Fred ran like a 240, almost enough to catch Marius, but he was really in his zone that was appropriate for an Ironman, whereas the rest of us were probably going a little too hard. All right. And we have a cat outside. I hate cats. All right, so what would I do differently next time? So the next time, I would definitely just cool my jets this first hour. Like, this was clearly where I spent a lot of my matches. I probably spent a majority of my time that was above threshold, etc., in this first bit, mostly because I could. So I would guess that a lot of the time I spent riding too hard was also in this section, because obviously I couldn't even ride that hard the back half of the bike. And I still rode decently fast. Like, obviously, that average speed leaves something to be desired. And I lost a lot of time. And if I had lost slightly less time, it probably would have been a better situation for me in the end, because I would have been not on damage, because when you're doing this power, like, this is pretty much damage control power. So if I'm not doing damage control power, I'm probably also going to run a little bit better too. So yeah, I mean, I probably left a little bit on the table there. I wouldn't say I would have been 20 minutes faster in the race, but I would guess, if I had ridden a slightly smarter race in the first half, then I would have been looking at a slightly faster second lap and also a slightly faster run. So that's kind of how I would break down this race. Let me know any questions you guys have in the comments below, and thanks for watching.